Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Circle Up and Get Real, where we talk about things that matter with people who matter. And I am so honored today to have as my guest Andrea Hensrud. And Andrea and I met once, we've kind of determined, in person. We're circling each other's orbits. We live in the same community and we have similar goals. We're both life coaches. Although her platform is very different than anything I have any information, knowledge, experience with, which is why I'm really excited to have you share your story with us, Andrea. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, it's fun because if, we could just look at each other's bio and go, oh yeah, I'd like that. Oh yeah, I like that. And that actually allows for amazing connections, which then lead to conversations that just sort of happen. At least that's my experience.
For sure. Same here too. And even just feeling a connectedness by reading your bio too, knowing that you are just here to support women and men too. I guess my platform is more for women. So just supporting humans.
Yeah.
Just do better in life and in careers and business and all the things. So I love that.
I know, me too. Oh, in my experience, and I'm a lot older than you are, I've had a lot more years to kind of try to figure this stuff out. When I look back on things, it's always been kind of for the same purpose, but I didn't know it at the time. It was always about finding connections and avoiding these areas that caused me to feel crappy. And I'd be like, why do I feel so crappy about that? And I didn't know. So I'd always say, it must be me. I'm wrong. I need to change. And over time now, I'm I'm actually starting to figure out that it's just because it wasn't the right combination of humans, the right energetic, space. It's not a judgment. It's just a noticing.
Yeah. And I love that too. And that's too, how I entered the space of coaching was because of all of my history and my experience. And I didn't have that support that I needed. And so I just decided to create it for other people.
I love that. So let's talk about you. Who are you? Where did you come from? Where did you grow up? Let's go back as far back as you want to go. And then I'll give a little bit more, a little bit more substance to your bio. Why don't I start there just for a second, just to say who you are. So Andrea is a licensed occupational therapist and certified health coach and life coach who is on fire to change the way the world experiences infertility. So she's got experience. Man, I tell you what, Andrea, that's a commitment. And you said you have more than 26 negative pregnancy tests. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about this. You do have a baby?
We have 2 children now.
2 children.
Through IVF. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to hear that story too. And what kind of reminded me that I wanted to share with you or ask you about is identity. It feels like you can kind of get lost in an identity in the process of your infertility. And so I'd like to come back to that. But before we get there, would you just start at the beginning or however far back you want to go? Who are you and where are you from?
I'm Andrea. I came from a family. I grew up in northeastern North Dakota. Yes, I have. In my family, I am the youngest of 4. I am, I believe, the 6th generation on going through our family farm. So I don't farm, but my brother does farm. And so we're up northeastern North Dakota, born and raised North Dakota. And I freaking love it here, even though I get a little down in February or March.
Oh man. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can do it though. We can do it.
Yeah. March is my birthday month. So there's always a little glimmer of hope there. But yeah, anyway, so super love it here. Where do I start? Okay.
I know it's hard. It's a hard question because people don't really ask it that often.
Yeah. So born and raised in North Dakota, I have an older brother who has Down syndrome actually. And so my whole childhood was, that's what I experienced I experienced life with a sibling who has special needs. And I just thought every family had a sibling with special needs. So I grew up loving, supporting, and helping others. And I always felt a little bit more mature than my peers because not a lot of 11-year-olds like help cut their siblings food or help, lay out clothes, this or that. But that was something that was super, like, when we talk about identity, it really started to shape who I was a helper. And so I was just a natural leader, being class president in high school, student council president. And then I went and I wanted to be an occupational therapist because of my experience with individuals with disabilities. And I absolutely loved that, and like flew into leadership through that era of my life as well. And so I always lead with my background is in occupational therapy. However, once I started to experience infertility with building a family with my husband and I noticed that I started to have a different passion in leadership for women experiencing the same traumas that I was experiencing. So I started to feel a pivot in my professional life probably 3 years ago, and actually took action. Well, it's honestly, June is kind of my 1 year anniversary of launching and like getting into my business here. So I started doing some coaching a couple years ago on how to make that pivot and that transition as well. And so I took what I knew from that trauma and just all of my leadership experience and all of my occupational therapy experience too, because, we work on the whole self. We work on physical, mental, emotional, spiritual well-being. And how much is that so related to life coaching, right? Is like beating all those drums over and over again. So that's a really high level overview of who I am.
I love it. I love that though. Where did you go to college?
I started at SDSU in Brookings,
Okay.
because I wanted to bust out of here.
Yeah.
I did not want to be tied to anything. Like, I just wanted to create who I was and not be tied to like what friendships I had that were maybe like having me be one way, or family, or this or that. And then after 3 semesters, I transferred to UND, and that is where I obtained my master's degree.
Okay. So you're a North Dakota girl. I mean, you can take the girl out of North Dakota, but you can't take the North Dakota out of the girl. At least that's been my experience too.
Yep.
What high school did you go to again?
The Langdon area high school.
Langdon.
So
Okay.
I grew up in Langdon. Yep.
Perfect. I'll edit this part out, but I have relatives in Osnabrück.
Yeah.
So it's close to Langdon.
That's the area.
Yep.
It's the area part of Langdon area.
Oh, perfect. Awesome. I love that. So UND got your degree. Are you in Fargo now?
Yes. So we live north of Fargo in Harwood, but we do life in Fargo as well.
Gotcha. Awesome. So we mentioned identity a little bit, and you said you wanted to kind of break out of that, because I think a lot of us do at some point. We want to see what else is out there in the world. You had established this identity pretty early in your life of a helper. You were mentioning, cutting your brother's food and doing those kinds of things that you didn't realize there was another way to be. And so that sort of put you on this path. But that identity, you said, has now shifted a little bit because you've experienced some things that you wouldn't have chosen. I'm kind of assuming something.
100%.
Yeah. And so you also alluded to the fact that you have been successful in achieving the family you wanted now through IVF. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because that's been your focus for, you said, the last year. You've been pretty specific.
Yes. So would you like me to talk a little bit more about our background and our story through infertility and how that has changed my identity, or like where do you want me to start with?
I like that. I like that. Is that the best place to pick this story up, or is there anything that leads you into that a little bit more?
I feel like there is a little bit of lead in with my professional life. Yeah. Okay. So I was the lead at our clinic in town, the lead occupational therapist. And I always assumed that I was this career woman, and I love to be successful. I'm not sure if you're into the Enneagrams, but I'm an Enneagram 3. Okay. And I love to achieve, and I love success, and I go, and it's just drive after drive after drive. And so when infertility struck, you are not successful. And that's why I think the number of 20 26 failures. I cut out. Did it cut out for you?
It's a good mix. I didn't miss anything. You said the
Okay.
number of 26 failures. So you might want to just start there.
Because it to me was a reminder of 26 failures. Because I mean, that's how I took it, is that I was a failure. And that every time I saw a negative pregnancy test, it was just like, I am not good enough. I am not enough. I cannot get pregnant. So therefore I am bad. You know, and then that carried over, of course, into like a variety of areas of my life. But simultaneously, I was kind of growing in the professional aspect, and I was really climbing up the ladder there. And because I was so unsuccessful in my world, in the personal space, I like was so driven professionally because I could control it. And so I was very successful. And that is what I thought who I was, is, you know, working all the time, being successful, first there, first to leave, and those types of things, that type of mentality. And then get through infertility. It took us quite a long. So we started with IUI, which is called.
You cut out again. So you said it took us quite a long, and then you cut out. So start there.
It took us quite a long time and many years, many unsuccessful treatments. We started with something called IUI, which is in utero insemination. And so essentially what they do is they take the sperm, they clean it up, they get it like polished and primed, and then they use a catheter and they insert the sperm for you, like up into your uterus. And that typically is a very successful treatment. So we did 6 of those, and they were all unsuccessful. And it was at that time where I just like mentally and emotionally and probably physically, it's a lot on your body to be injecting yourself with hormones. And then I became very obsessive, very, very obsessive about what I put into my body, what I ate, what I drank, my movement. And then I was not able to spend time with family and friends. Like I was probably physically present, but I was rarely emotionally and mentally present. And I would say no to a lot of things, or I'd live in this world of like, what if I'm pregnant, or, you know, what then what would happen then? We were scheduling our 5-year anniversary trip to Santa Ynez Wine Valley in California. And we were going to go on this wine tour. And I was like, but what if I'm pregnant? And it was at that moment that I was like, just stop. You're not going to be pregnant. And what a wonderful, wonderful thing to have to deal with, like, is getting a refund on a wine tour if I'm pregnant. Like, I would love to take that. So I started to shift all of this. So I became super, super obsessive with that. But we took a year off and we had a blast. I said, we're just going to have so much fun. And we did have a lot of fun in that year. And it was kind of this slow go of coming back to I was like, you know what? I feel like I'm ready to just do the first step towards building a family again, which was just visiting my doctor and an annual exam, you know. And then after that was complete, I think I'm just going to call the fertility clinic and say, and so it's like, I started just doing this baby step little by little. And then we moved right to IVF, and we did all that. And I'm talking about this like it was so easy. There's months in between each of these steps. Did IVF. We got pregnant our first round of IVF with twins. And halfway through my pregnancy, we did lose one of the twins. And we ended up still delivering a healthy little girl. She's 5.5. She'll go to kindergarten this fall.
What's her name?
Her name's Charlie.
Cute.
And then we did IVF again 2 years later, and one embryo took, and we have him, and he's 3.5, and his name is Soren.
Nice. Oh, congratulations. Boy, I tell you. Now, I love that you said there's a lot more to this than it sounds like. Yeah, we just did this. I can't even imagine the emotional roller coaster those first 5 years before you said, we're just going to take a break. And I appreciate your astuteness in saying I became obsessive about this, because it feels to me, just getting to know you a little bit now, that is something that is in your DNA. You're an achiever. You are someone who, it seems to me, is very persistent, and that helps you in a lot of ways, I'm betting. But in this way, taking that year off, did you find that you said you shifted a little bit in your energy in that year off? When you came back, did you bring with you, when I say came back, came out of that year, did you bring any obsession with you as you started the journey again?
That's a great question. I don't know if I've ever like sat and reflected if the obsession was the same, because I always viewed the obsession, I call it the pit of infertility. Like you're just at the bottom. And that's when I was obsessed. And I feel like when we started doing IVF, I was coming out of that pit. I was like crawling out of it. Basically, I always like view it. I talk to my listeners on my podcast too. And I was like getting you up off the bathroom floor. Cause I feel like that's usually where you have your meltdowns, is because you see the negative pregnancy test. So you just like cry on the bathroom floor. And so that was me getting up off of the bathroom floor type of a season. And I was very focused and driven. I would say less obsessed, because I was like, I remember I actually went out. So we were like coworkers were meeting after work for something, and I had a timed shot that night, and I went. And I just had an alarm on my phone when I needed to leave so I could go make my timed shot, because everything is timed. You have to do everything exactly as they say. And that I would have never done that. I would have just stayed home. So I think, yes, I was less obsessed and more just like focused and driven and dedicated versus like all consumed.
That's a really good distinction, because I think about, not that I know a whole lot about addictions, but I think we all have some sort of addiction in our lives. For some people, it's very obvious. And for some people, it might be an addiction to working out or to making sure I'm doing things correctly, or it almost turns into an obsessive compulsive sort of way of being for some people. And it sounds to me like coming out of that, it became much healthier for you. And maybe what you've learned now as a coach and what you can share with your listeners on your podcast and your clients is your own lived experience. And
yeah, that's definitely something I've noticed they identify with, is that, well, I've been there. I get it. But what I've noticed is I have more listeners than just women experiencing infertility, because really, so my podcast is called Diagnosis Infertility. And it's not necessarily that I'm talking to the woman experiencing infertility. It's me talking about my experiences and how that obsessiveness through infertility and like everything that I lost. Like I let my mental, emotional, and physical health just like plummet. Relationships were starting to plummet. And just how you kind of regain that power and that energy back after you experience your trauma. Because everyone has trauma. It looks differently for everyone. We a lot of times think of trauma as a very specific event that of losing someone or an abuse or something like that. But infertility was trauma for me, and losing my son halfway through our pregnancy was a trauma, for me. And that's too where that identity started to shift in, from being this like person who just needed all this success professionally to being who I am now, which is a part-time clinician, because I still love what I do and I'm good at it. But I was just so surprised that like, I knew when my daughter was going to get off the bus, I wanted to be the one there. Like I didn't want anyone else there. And that when I allowed myself yeah, I was wondering when I allowed myself to accept that want and that wish, it was an incredible moment for me, because I accepted that, wow, I want to be the person to get her off the bus. I don't want to be that person leading this big team and growing this big team anymore. And I had to grieve that identity actually through coaching. And it took me a long time to just like lean into it, accept it, grieve it, and then move into this new shift of that infertility changed me. I am not the girl I used to be, like pre-shots, pre-scheduled, pre-negative pregnancy test. She is no more.
Mhm.
And I learned through all of this process, and like I said, through help and through coaching, that I have a new identity in being a mom, but now being an advocate. And what I learned too through the obsessiveness was taking care of myself.
Mhm.
And I'm on a huge mission, for sure, in the Fargo Moorhead area and wherever Zoom will reach,
Mhm.
to help change the way women experience life in general, to be honest.
Well, and I think you said earlier, you have men who are listening too. And so it's not just specifically the infertility track. It doesn't sound like what you just said is I had to learn to shift my identity. I had to let go through grief and through I think the word that kept occurring to me when you were talking was awareness, because without that awareness, there would be no reason to, or no backing for you to do any shifting. And I think a lot of times people get into a space where something happens to them and they take on victim energy, and then they are a victim of their circumstances instead of recognizing that they still have choice. And you showed from what you've just explained that, yeah, it sucked. There were a lot of things in that were really, really difficult. Yet you said with hope and with help and with support, you are now a new person, even though you had to mourn maybe the old identity in some ways.
Yeah, there's a lot of grieving that happens with change. Good change, right? I have two beautiful kids. I paid a lot of freaking money for these kids.
Yeah, right.
This is a great change.
Mhm.
But even with good change comes grief
Mhm.
and loss. And that's okay. That took me a long time to realize that I can grieve who I used to be, because I loved her. That was a fun season of my life and I was really good at it. But it just wasn't, it's not what I want anymore. It's not
Yeah.
who I am anymore. And when you talked about awareness, and for me as an Enneagram 3, I didn't slow down enough to be aware of anything probably
Mhm.
in my life. And when you slow down and you are aware, it's very surprising, but kind of amazing at the same time.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think thinking about leadership in general, men, women, whatever positional leadership we might talk about, it's the person behind the doing that is actually the purpose for whatever's getting done, right? And so without that awareness, without that knowing, it sounds like knowing deep down what you actually do want. I'm going to say instead, although I kind of believe there's a point at which you could probably shift again and say, oh, this also, instead of, saying one or the other.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, that's always happening because I'm like, oh, maybe this, and what I've learned too is that just because of like one track you've gone down doesn't mean that's the track for the rest of your life. That doesn't mean like that's what you do and that's who you are forever. And I mean, and that's maybe too what you experience with some of your coaching and the people that you help too, is that doesn't it doesn't mean that has to be forever.
Right, right. And I think we forget that choice. You said it earlier that everything changes. I mean, change is part of living. And if we don't embrace change, we're going to be a victim of change. And then we're going to end our lives, or end up in our lives being someone who's just old and cranky because things aren't going the way we think they should.
Yeah. Have you read the book, Who Moved My Cheese?
Yeah. Spencer Johnson. Yeah, a long time ago. And that was just kind of fundamental in my career development back 100 years ago. I'm a lot older than you, but yeah, it's still very relevant.
Yeah, it was just interesting. It came back up in my life. I read it probably 10 years ago, 15. But yeah, it changed. Change happens. It's not always bad. It's not always good,
Yeah, exactly.
but it's inevitable.
So if you go back to your roots as a North Dakota girl, as I will in this conversation right now, when you went to South Dakota, maybe you were too young, you didn't notice, because South Dakota is not that much different from North Dakota. We kind of are set in our ways. We North Dakotans, we hardy stock, who will say, nope, 20 years ago, 20 generations ago, we did it this way, and this is the way it's always going to be. I mean, up where you're from, there are a lot of people that are pretty closed to change. How do we handle that when we're not really, we're cut from the cloth, but it feels like we're not subject to that limited way of existing?
That's a great question. So for me personally, I'm very blessed. My parents are not of that mindset. My mom came from New York. The missile base brought her up to Langdon. And I love her story. She's like, I was walking through, what are those detectors? Like metal detectors to get into school. And then she comes to Langdon, North Dakota, like the next week. So that's her, right? So she's always been this one of, accepting creativity, accepting like all these other humans, as the world is like fighting to accept this. Like that is something I've been taught since day one, especially living with an individual in my house who has special needs. So like when I go to my mom for support, it's always been like, you can be whoever you want to be. But I love that question because not everyone comes from this mold and not everyone has this mentality. And it's something I see because I am a board chair too in the community, and change is hard. And I've seen it like in my own work too, with a different generation. And I've seen it even just with peers of like, that's not how things are supposed to be, especially like farm,
right.
Farm life. What I've noticed for me, myself, and what I encourage my clients to do too, is that you can't do this alone. And that's a lot of personal development. And personal development was new for me. Like, so when I had my son is when I decided no more. And that's when I kind of learned what personal development was. And it was equal parts for me too, of like, reading my Bible, because I am a strong Christian and faith-filled, reading my Bible, but also personal development. And so when you can dig in and work on yourself and reflect on yourself, and for me, I journaled a lot, but I also went to therapy and I saw a therapist, and I worked really freaking hard at EMDR. Are you aware of? Yeah. Yep. And that is when you can really, that's when I changed from like, I am not good enough to I am good enough as I am. And I can do the things that I want to do. And I have the capacity and the capability to change and do all those. And so I got this really big freaking tattoo.
Yeah, I see it. You can't see it if you're listening to the audible, but it's beautiful. And it's all over her left shoulder and arm.
There you go.
It's roses. It looks like flowers.
Peonies. Yeah.
Peonies. Beautiful.
And that was as a product of, I can get a tattoo because I'm not this professional leader in this company. I can get a tattoo because it's something I want. Like I can do this. And everyone in my life was shocked.
Wow.
And so everyone's asking me, what's the meaning of your tattoo? And the true meaning of my tattoo is like shifting into who I am and this identity of like being who I want to be, and finally releasing that creativity and, starting this business and doing this, even though it's like, people still think I'm nuts because it's not consistent income.
Yeah. Oh, welcome to my world. Yes, very much. This is so good because now we could open up a whole other track for this conversation. You said a few things that I think are really, really significant, and people in our part of the world, which is where we both live, and yet our worlds are expanded because of Zoom and because of virtual opportunities. Could you talk a little bit more about EMDR? If people don't know about this, part of what keeps us stuck are our unconscious beliefs and things that have been programmed in our unconscious through events, people, situations that we might not even remember. And so EMDR, I know, is one way. There are other ways, but I'd love your just tell us about that process.
Yes. So I knew, so once I started this like thing of personal development and just growing, I became addicted to it in a good way. That I love to work out because it releases my stress and helps with my mental health. I mean, having physical benefits of getting stronger is amazing, but it was more of an anxiety outlet for myself. And I became to just I just love to feel good. And then I noticed that I kept having a barrier. There was always something in the way. And it was always me never feeling good enough, even though, like I said, I have the stats and the data of showing success, but I never felt good enough.
Yep.
And that's when I decided I need to reach out. And I was talking to a friend who is in the mental health realm, and she had suggested EMDR. So EMDR, I always forget it, so I looked it up while you're chatting, is called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So what it is you go back. It's now I'm going to geek out with my science background too.
Oh, this is great.
Is you're doing bilateral integration through your eye movement. So you're getting the brains or the sides of your brain to connect and to work in unison, if you will. And so we're crossing midline and we're getting both sides of your brain to like fire up. And that's like the eye movement part of it. And what that's doing is it's allowing to bring up some of the past traumas that you have, but it's kind of like voodoo in a sense. I'm like, this is magic.
Yeah.
It truly is magic, because prior to that, I went through like all of the very first memory I ever have of not being good enough. And I was a child, and we just went through the years, and every memory I had of not being good enough, we just like wrote it down. And then we would go back through it and we would do the rapid eye movement, and I would process through what I was feeling at that time. And the reason why I call it magic is because I would start the trauma being with a pretty high level of disturbance. So you would do 2 Likert scales at the start of each of them. You do the level of disturbance you have, and then the level of, so like my negative core belief was I'm not good enough. And then my alternative core belief was I am enough as I am. And so the level of disturbance you have, and then you would put on the scale of like how much you believe that you are enough as you are. And then I would start it with like a 7 disturbance and like a 3 in believing that I am enough as I am. And in like 10 minutes of processing, I would completely flip it. And I would be at a 0 level disturbance and like a 7 of I believe that. And I'm like, this is magic.
Well, and it feels like magic because beliefs are so interesting. A belief is simply a thought you think over and over and over again. It doesn't mean it's true. And if we don't know that, our unconscious will guide us in the place where it has been programmed, whether or not it's healthy, whether or not it's true, whether or not it's beneficial. We don't know what we don't know. And so the beauty of what you're describing with EMDR is that when it's, I'm going to call it balanced, when the hemispheres are in a better harmony, you don't know that you ever felt the other way. And that's why it feels like magic, at least in my experience. I'm a certified Psych K facilitator, and it's very similar. And so in any of these ways of balancing or harmonizing our unconscious beliefs that aren't true, we don't necessarily like, ooh, I have, my arm doesn't hurt anymore, because it's not that. It's something that's at a deeper level. And so sometimes this feeling that you have, perhaps now that you can say, I feel better. You said, I'm addicted to feeling good. And the way that you're experiencing your life, you can attribute it to EMDR because you hadn't done anything before that to say, what else could it have been that causes me to feel good?
Yeah, well, exactly. And my belief all the time was that I am not good enough. And like I said, that really impacted my ability to get to the next level, to start a business, to get myself out there, to network, to change. I mean, it sounds corny and cheesy, but change the world. Like there's a big ripple of the work that we do with people in our lives. And that belief, it's so funny you said that, because that's a one thing I talk about with clients all the time. I'm like, you know that, but do you believe that type of a thing? And so you're right. There's a huge difference in knowing something but believing that to be true.
And then the weird thing about that, for people who are observing you, they don't know what's going on in your unconscious. You present as someone who's very confident. You would present as someone who knows what she's doing. You're very educated, you're articulate, all of those things. Yet on the inside are these things we haven't either identified for ourselves, haven't owned, haven't stepped into. And I'm just putting words in your mouth here, but the feeling you probably had when you didn't feel good enough, if you could articulate how that felt, like, do you have language for that?
How I felt when I didn't feel good enough. I would say like deflated and down and weak was probably like one of the bigger ones, and like hopeless a lot of the times.
So imagine, listeners, what hopeless would feel like in your body. Like, how do you feel that? When you say that, I'm visual, so I sense a dark cloud around my head that I can't see through, because that's how hopeless feels to me. And we don't, in my generation at least, you don't talk about feelings. What are you talking about? You stuff those feelings. There's no need to talk about you do your job, you go to work. And so I'm so happy that people are starting to put words to feelings. And it's people like you who are doing the work to share your lived experience, not your, get on the stage and pound your fist and say, if only you do what I did, you can be great too. It's sharing your story. So this could be just me, but it feels like what's been missing for me and for a lot of people in my generation is a sense of belonging and loneliness. And I must be the only one, because people are so hesitant to share their stories. And so when you start sharing your story of all of the grief and all of the loss and all of you said money, I mean, the investment you made in time and
a lot of money.
But now you have these two beautiful children, and it's become your life's work, it sounds like, to open these doors for people.
For sure. And, when you say like how it felt for you as that cloud around your head, how it manifested in my body was low energy. Was a lot of how this not feeling good enough manifested for me. And so it manifests so differently for every person. I feel like low energy is a pretty common one that I do hear of when I talk to a lot of people who are experiencing shame, guilt, whatever confusion in their life.
Yeah.
But, and I love what you said about like not getting on the stage and preaching about like, this is what I did, because it's not a one size fits all type of solution. And as a life coach yourself too, we ask the questions to get you as the client to come up with like, what is it that you need in your life? And what is it that you want in your life? And what's like the next best challenge for yourself that's still comfortable to get to it. So absolutely to all of it.
I'm so grateful that you're here and in our community. And I'm so grateful that we have resources now available to all of us who are starting to venture into this world of consciousness. We're living our lives much more consciously, which means that the dark places show up as well. We're not hiding everything. And, if you don't shine the light on the dark places, you'll always be in the dark. So you are a light bringer in a lot of ways. And I'm grateful. So I have your bio over here. I'm just looking at what Andrea can bring to you, anybody who's looking for what you might want in addition and maybe in contrast to what you are feeling, is just an opportunity to be around her. She's very fun. And her bio says, I'm a really freaking good time. So where might people be able to find you if they want more info, Andrea?
Yes, that's a great question. So I do have a website. It's very easy. It's andreahensrud.com. And that links to everything. I am pretty active on Instagram. My handle is her.infertile.myrtle, which
cute.
I think highlights a lot of the sarcasm that you will experience through Instagram on there.
Nice. I like that.
yeah, so if you hit up the website though, there's a link to the podcast, links to Instagram, LinkedIn, phone number, all that stuff. And I am also textable.
Textable. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll put that in. Do you want to give that? Well, you can give me that number and I'll put it in the show notes. So AndreaHensrud.com, host of, why don't you talk a little bit about your podcast before we run?
Yes, so host of Diagnosis Infertility. And like I said, this is like I target women like 25 to 45-ish who have experienced the trauma of infertility. And I do talk a lot about infertility, but like I said, I have a lot of listeners that are getting a lot of good nuggets about just applying it to any trauma that they're feeling in their lives. Because like I said, it's, when you start to call a woman a bitch in your head at the grocery store who's pregnant, like people need to talk about that and they need to hear about that, and that you'll get a lot of that on the podcast.
Yeah. Oh, nice. So you'll get some real. This is what we love here at Circle Up and Get Real, because it's all about being real. Thank you for this real conversation, Andrea, and for reaching out. And I am excited to listen more to your podcast, even though I'm not in your target market, just to support you. And thank you. Thank you for being real with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Take care. And as always, everybody, go get real. Talk to you again. Bye.